Well, one of the great problems, to my mind, in the world situation today is the lack of awareness on the part of vast numbers of the general public of global problems. And the root cause of this is the lack of awareness of the backgrounds and the cultures of other people.
Right.
People grow up in the cultural box into which they were born, and there they remain for the rest of their lives. Now, that is not good enough for the 21st century. And I have consistently said that we have to broaden the perspectives of people by giving them more awareness of other cultures, other legal systems, other religions, and so on. So if we can do that, there will begin to be a better appreciation of the problems and the attitudes of other people. But if you don't have that, then of course you function in total ignorance, and when you function in total ignorance, you function wrongly.
And how can something like the global movement of moderates help us in achieving that result?
Well, first of all, by exposing people to the greater perspectives, the broader perspectives of one human family occupying one small planetary home. In the past, we could divide ourselves into territories and regions and districts and so on. We cannot do that any longer. The time is running out. This is the first century where humanity has had the power to destroy itself.
Right.
At the very commencement of the century.
Would you like some water?
Yes, I have some water. This is the first century to dawn with humanity having the power to destroy itself. Now, when the 20th century dawned, there had been a bloody 19th century before that, the Napoleonic century, where there had been so many wars and so much bloodshed that people were appalled when they contemplated the new century that was about to dawn, the 20th century, and they planned for a brand new century of peace. There was a great peace conference in 1799 called by the Tsar of Russia. It was held at The Hague, and it was a meeting of the top philosophers and the top power centers of the world, and they tried to plan for a brand new century. Unfortunately, that turned out to be an absolute mess.
Right.
And it became a bloodier century than the 20th century. But at least there was another century in which to correct itself. But now if we bungle the 21st century as we bungle the 20th century, we will have no 22nd century to put our house in order. So we have to do that now. And the way to do that is through education.
Education. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, let's just go back to your point about it is an era where humanity is capable of destroying itself.
Yeah.
And one perfect example is the race for nuclear arms.
Of course.
Yes. Now, the principles of international law have been absolutely violated by the nuclear weapons.
Absolutely violated
Yeah.
in every detail. And this matter came before the International Court when I was there. And I wrote a very detailed judgment pointing out that every aspect of nuclear weapons, whether it is the research or the production or the manufacture or the testing or the deployment or the storage, all of these were totally illegal and violated every principle of international law. Give me just a minute.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
Violated every principle of international law. So that is the position where we enter the century with power to destroy ourselves. Now, previously when the nuclear weapon was used, it was used on a sitting duck target which could not retaliate. The next time the weapon is used, it will be used on a target that can retaliate. And there will be the nuclear weapons flying on both sides, and one never knows what would happen.
So can we use a concept like moderation to talk to nuclear states who are so intent?
Of course we can. We can, and we have got to show. Please excuse me. Excuse. Can I have a? Somehow my voice is giving me a bit of bother today.
Okay.
Have you got some of those lozenges?
Lozenges. That's good.
Sorry? That's my granddaughter who's looking after me.
Oh.
No, I have a bit of asthma which is coming up.
Mm.
The last time a nuclear weapon was used, it was used on a target that could not retaliate, what you might describe as a sitting duck target. This time, if a nuclear weapon is used, there will be other nuclear powers that will retaliate.
Yeah.
And if you have the nuclear weapon flying in both directions, there comes about what is known as the nuclear winter. The nuclear winter is the result of the debris flying all around and blotting out the sunlight. And that means crop failures throughout the world. And that means that we'll be digging for roots in order to survive. And we go back to the most primitive stage of human history. That's only if there are survivors. Right. And that will be the position if there is another nuclear war. So I think the process of education on all fronts is necessary. Education about the cultures of other people, the grievances of other people, the effects of disagreement, the consequences of nuclear war, all of these need to be driven home to the general public. And what is happening today is that the rulers of the world are very often getting away with violations of international law because the people do not know international law.
Yeah.
And they do not know that their rulers are disobeying the first commandments of good government. So if people can be advised about this, they will also operate as a restraint upon their rulers.
Talking about the leaders, one that has risen to our attention recently is, of course, with the passing of Kim Jong-il, him passing on power to his younger son.
Yes.
Now, can someone with just 2 years of training who does have a nuclear arsenal, is this something that the world needs to be worried about?
No, in general, of course, I am totally opposed to the position of sons succeeding their parents, mainly because their parents held high position.
Right.
Because you have got to earn that position yourself. It is different with with a monarchy, because the monarchy is symbolic. But if you are the holder of real power, then you must earn that power for yourself.
Okay. Now, the other thing that science, of course, has had some positive benefits for the world.
Yes.
For example, things like sustainable development. How do you think the world repositories of ancient wisdom can be harnessed to strike some sort of balance between the need of development as well as the need to, look after Mother Nature?
Now, what we lose sight of is that modern civilization is totally, shall we say, mindless about the rights of future generations. We just consume the rightful inheritance of generations yet to come, just for our present profit. That is absolutely wrong. And I think that has got to be driven home to everybody. You say you love your children, but see what you are doing to your children's children's children. And you are doing it for generations to come, because the after effects of some of this will last for 25,000 years. That is 1,000 generations.
Yeah.
And we are doing that, knowing the consequences, and still doing it for our present profit. That is absolutely barbaric. I remember when the nuclear weapons case was argued before the International Court of Justice, one of the lawyers for the non-nuclear powers said that if Stone Age man had been able to damage the environment in a manner which affects us today, we would say, what savages, what brutes, what barbarians. But even if Stone Age man could have done that, they would have done it without a knowledge of the consequences. But here we have the full knowledge of what we are doing, and we are yet doing it. And I would therefore say that we are the most irresponsible generation in human history.
So there comes the argument from some of the people I spoke to yesterday.
Yeah.
They say this, global movement of moderates is not a political thing. It's not up to the governments. It's a social thing, and it really is up to the individual. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are that what is important in modern society is the individual. And all the individuals all over the world need to be informed about these dangers and need to be given an insight into the problems and the attitudes and so on of other people. So I feel that every individual can do something. Just the rulers of the world by themselves cannot. The world progresses through the collective efforts of all the individuals comprising society. So every individual can do something. And we are totally neglectful of our duties when we do not instruct individuals what they can do to further democracy and preserve the human race.
Which then again falls back on
education. And I myself have started a Peace Studies Center which aims at doing this. I get undergraduates from the top undergraduates from universities across the country. And this year it has spread throughout South Asia also. And we inform them about all these problems. We inform them about the cultures of other people. We get them every morning to read the sacred texts of the major religions, themselves select a passage, discuss it among themselves, and after some time you see how interested they become in other religions than their own. So we have the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, the Bible, and the Hindu sacred books and so on, which we give to them, the Bhagavad Gita. And we find that after the second or third day of this workshop, they are themselves reading it with great interest, and it opens to them new worlds that they had never known before. And what is very important is that when you look at all the religions of the world, they teach us the same basic principles about the unity of the human family, the dignity of the human person, the peaceful resolution of disputes, the avoidance of aggression, the care of future generations, the sanctity of treaties, moderate conduct even in warfare. Every one of those is dealt with by every one of the religions, and they are dealt with on the same note. And we say we are religious people. Most of the rulers of the world like to say that they are of this religion or that religion, but many of them do exactly the opposite of what the religion teaches. So we have got to point that out to the general public.
Now, even in religion, moderation is applied, and it has been since the dawn of time. So what can we learn today about moderation that we don't already know?
Well, moderation has been taught by all the philosophers, the Greek philosophers, Confucius and so on, but all the religions teach it. Now, the Buddha has been very, very, shall we say, ample in his discourses on moderation in human conduct, the middle path. You do not choose either extreme. And all the religions, when they talk of love and fraternity and duty to your neighbor and the oneness of the human family, they are teaching moderation. Now, there is no point in my accumulating excessive wealth if a rich man will find it more difficult to pass through, to enter the kingdom of heaven, than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. The same sort of thing. If they know that all that they accumulate by way of wealth is of no benefit to them in the long term, but that what is of benefit is the assistance they give to others. And there you have parables like the Good Samaritan parable, which teaches all Christians it is your duty to do what you can to assist your neighbor in distress. And what do the rich countries do to the poor countries? They exploit them even further. Well, that's the way the world is going. And it's supposed to be a world that's bound to religious values, which is absolutely the reverse. So, and also I have felt that international law has got a lot to learn from all the religions. You see, what happened was that when modern international law was worked out by the European philosophers, roughly, you can date it from 1625, when Hugo Grotius wrote his treatise on international law. which is supposed to be the beginning
Right.
of modern international law in the West. Now that treatise was written in the midst of the 30 Years' War, which raged in Europe from 1618 to 1648. That was a war where Christians were killing Christians. Right? And they were doing so in the name of Christ. They were Christians killing Christians, and it became clear that religious interpretation was very often the cause of conflict. So Grotius, when he started international law, deliberately distanced international law from religion.
Yeah.
But we are no longer in that situation. Now, nearly 400 years after that, we have come to the stage where we have to reintegrate the values of religion into international law. And when I went to the international court, I saw that the international law that was being administered was largely a Euro-centered international law, going back to the works of Grotius and so on, but without taking in the perspectives of other cultures. So I was able to show that international law can benefit enormously from the wisdom of Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and not only that, but also the various cultural systems of the world. And so I integrated that into the jurisprudence of the court. For example, take even the native inhabitants of America, as the Red Indians as they used to be called. They had a rule in their tribes that you could not take any important decision without thinking of 7 generations to come. We take our important decisions depending on the next ballot, which is 3 years from now, or the next balance sheet, which is 2 years from now. Those are our horizons. We can't see beyond that. But that's all wrong. We must have somebody like the wise man of the tribe or the village elder to govern or to inspire wiser decisions than can be taken by politicians and economists.
And my last question to you, sir, would be about looking into the future.
Yes.
We've made mistakes over history. What are the mistakes that we need to avoid making in the 21st century to see the 22nd?
The mistakes we need to avoid are to think of ourselves as separate compartments of the human race. We are all one family. We mustn't think of the earth as being enormous and of being infinite in size. It is a small planetary home which we must all share. Earth resources are getting exhausted. They are not inexhaustible. Whatever we do impacts on generations yet to come for thousands of years. We have got to see that disputes are resolved by peaceful settlement. We have to avoid aggression. We have to have a uniform international law which is based on general principles which all the nations accept. We have got to see that time is limited within which to make our choice. All these are very important. And I have shown that all these religions have so much to teach moderns. For example, Hindu law had a very clear rule that hyper-destructive weapons could not be used in warfare. In the war between Rama and Ravana, there was the offer to Rama of a hyper-destructive weapon which would ravage the enemy's countryside and decimate his population. But he was told, now remember, you must consult the sages of the law before you decide to use it. And they were more civilized then than now. And the ruler consulted the sages of the law and obeyed what they said. And they said, you shall not use this weapon in warfare because it goes beyond the purposes of war. The purpose of war is to subjugate your enemy and live in peace with him, not to destroy his population and ravage his countryside. So things of that sort. Likewise in Buddhism, there is the statement of the famous Emperor Asoka sent missionaries all over the world to preach Buddhism, and he sent his own son, Mahinda, who might have even succeeded him on the throne. He became a Buddhist monk, and he went over to different countries. He came to my country, Sri Lanka, and accosted the king when he was on a hunting trip. And he said, what is this you are doing? You are killing these animals, and so on. Remember, you may be the king of this country, but you are not the owner of this land. You hold it for the benefit of those who are entitled to use it, both now and in the generations to come. So these are principles which international law can acquire can integrate into its stock of principles and can reinforce itself thereby and make international law a system which all the world accepts, rather than giving the impression that it is a monocentric Eurocultural system which is being imposed upon the rest of the world.
Right.
And one other thing I should mention is that the first books on Islamic law, on international law, were written by the Islamic jurists centuries before the West even thought of it. And there were Islamic jurists who wrote treatises on the sanctity of treaties, the treatment of diplomats, the conduct on the battlefield, care of enemy populations, and all that sort of thing. And that was the first systematic study of international law, which thereafter the West, they started it and got some wisdom from the Islamic jurists, but it is not generally known in the West that all this wisdom was there in Islam, and likewise in ancient Buddhism and ancient Hinduism. So that is what we have to propagate and make people better aware of the rich store of global wisdom which lies untapped and which we have to use if humanity is to survive.
Thank you very much for your insights. So it sounds like, the world leaders have a lot of work and research ahead of them. It was a pleasure. Thank you.